Radhe Radhe. Today is Saturday, 1st February 2025. A new month has already started, second one of the year 2025. And here we are to present to you this recap video for today's Bhagavad Gita study session. We've continued, of course, along our journey of chapter 10, covered two verses today after the usual recap quiz, and of course, one of them being extremely special and important with, of course, visual imagery. So let's see as we bring up the slides what we had covered as far as that content goes. Again, as you momentarily see the cover slide, you'll see that we covered chapter 10, verses 19 and 20. The recap quiz was for last time's content on chapter 10, verses 16, 17, and 18. So please take a look at the description for this video to get the link for the free community portal page where you can get these slides, go through these quiz questions, and get all these recap videos and other reference material as well sequentially. So that is again in the description. So with that, we get into today's content, starting with chapter 10, verse 19. Shri Bhagavanuvacha Hanta te kathayishyami Divyahyatma vibhutayah Pradhanyatah kuru shrestha Nastyanto vistarasya me. So, chapter 10, verse 19, let's first look at one or two important Sanskrit words out of the few we covered in class. I think we'll go with this one today. We've obviously understood Atma Vibhutayaha. Components are Atma and Vibhuti. So, it's of course my divine glories. But then, which ones does Sri Krishna talk about? He can only talk about a few, finite number of them. And he'll therefore, of course, only talk about the most salient, important, principal ones. So that is pradhanyataha, salient. Again, salient, important, or principal. So that is pradhanyataha. And then, of course, continue adding to your separate, list of appellations as we often see and also saw in the quiz question. Here, there is an appellation for Arjun that Sri Krishna uses, which is Kuru Shrestha. You've heard this from Mummy before as well. Shrestha, the best, the foremost. Kuru, of course, of the Kurus. So the best of the Kurus, Kuru Shrestha, that is Arjun. The verse itself is about, Sri Krishna now starting to speak after some of Arjun's questions and comments, including how Arjun can, know Sri Krishna, in what forms can he meditate upon him. So now, and Arjun said he never tires of hearing his nectar, Sri Krishna's words that are like nectar. Therefore, now Sri Krishna starts and says that he shall, of course, speak, he shall describe his divine and detailed glories, but of course, he'll only talk about them briefly and only a few of them, the salient, important ones, because there is no end to their detail. In fact, that's why the catchphrase here as a question is detailed discourse. Yes, it is a discourse of details of Sri Krishna's divine glories. How detailed is it? Only briefly and finitely, because there is no limit to how much Sri Krishna has and could have told us, but we can't, of course, fathom or comprehend or have the time to be able to get all that. So in terms of the commentary, of course, Swamiji has given a reference to the Amar Kosh, very widely respected ancient Sanskrit dictionary, where we now see again the term Vibhuti. Vibhuti we have seen as, right, these opulences of God. It's part of the name of chapter 10. And here, Vibhuti is Vibhutir Bhutir Aishwaryam. That is power and wealth. God's power, God's wealth. All of those are unlimited. In fact, even more, we've heard very often, Nam, Roop, Lila, Gun, Dham, names, forms, pastimes, etc. All these are also unlimited. So Swamiji stresses, even though it may seem repetitive, but it's so important for us to get this. Everything about God is unlimited. He has unlimited forms, unlimited names, unlimited abodes, unlimited dissensions, unlimited pastimes, unlimited devotees, and so on. In fact, one of the names, appellations, one of the terms used for God in the Vedas is Anant, which is unlimited. Swamiji quotes from the Shvetashvatar Upanishad. He also quotes from the Ramayana, Hari Ananta, Hari Katha Ananta. God is unlimited and the pastimes he enacts in his unlimited avatars are also unlimited. So much connection there with, of course, the use of the name Anant, which is unlimited. In fact, sage Vedvyas further states in the Bhagavatam something about childish intellect. If we think we can count the glories of God, we have a childish intellect. In fact, we might potentially be successful in counting the specks of dust on the crest of the earth, startling as that sounds. But we will not be successful in counting all the glories of God. So this is why Sri Krishna will, of course, only explain a small fraction of his vibhutis. If you remember, we mentioned in class about taking a look at chapter 2, verse 29. So right here, take a look at that. And in the very first paragraph of the commentary, Swamiji, in fact, has also mentioned Anant in a different context way back then. Ananta Shesh, that is that divine 10,000-headed serpent that Lord Vishnu resides on. He, that divine serpent, has been singing the glories of God since the beginning of creation. Amazing. More amazing, he's not yet done. He still has not completed them. So Anant Shesh has not been able to yet complete singing all the glories of God. What can we expect in our mere mortal forms? At best, we can take the most benefit of the opportunities to read, hear, learn, and listen to some of these glories that Sri Krishna is briefly describing to Arjun, and of course for the benefit of us as well. So that is the connection with Anant as well. And last comment, remember in class we said sometimes you hear this specks of dust example in the context of specks of sand. So if you try to count sand on the seashore or at the ocean, we may be successful. Again, difficult as that is, but we can never count the unlimited glories of God. Next up, let us take a look at chapter 10, verse 20. Very, very important, as we mentioned in class and in this video as well. It'll show you the imagery that helps perhaps also, but even while hearing it or reading the commentary, you can get that in your mind. And numerically also, 10 and 20, perhaps a little easy to remember. Aham Atma Gudakesha Sarvabhutashaya Stitah Aham Adishcha Madhyam Cha Bhutanam Anta Eva Cha. First, let's look at a couple of important words or phrases. We have, I think, the main one here, which is Ashaya Stitaha. As we said in class, if there's one word or phrase or anything you want to get out of this verse, definitely note this down. Ashaya Stitaha, seated in the heart. And then you can also revisit this pair of opposites we covered. Adihi, the beginning, Antaha, the end. So beginning and end, Adihi, Antaha. Well, here, what do we have? We have throbbing throne. So with alliteration, the description here of what Sri Krishna explicitly states, he is seated in the heart of all living entities. The heart throbs. Sri Krishna, the king, the queen, the supreme, that kingdom, his kingdom and seat, his throne, is of course truly, as we now know, the heart in the heart of all living entities. The heart throbs, that is the throbbing throne, the true seat of Sri Krishna in each of us. And he states it very precisely. He is seated in the heart of all living entities. And then further, he is the beginning, the middle, and the end of all beings. So we see in detail, of course, Swamiji explaining here how, of course, Sri Krishna may seem like he's further than the furthest. We do know that, yet he is also closer than the closest. He's in our hearts, he's in the region of our hearts. We described in class how, of course, we're talking about this etheric or ethereal heart. So you can revisit that term from an English standpoint. Ether, ethereal. You may know it perhaps from a chemistry concept, but beyond that, we also know it is to do with subtle concepts. And even beyond that, it is to do with God, divinity, heaven. So this is the ethereal heart that is being talked about. It's the one that, if we recall, we talked about chapter 2, verse 28, which is right here, the verse in which Swamiji has described in the commentary the three different bodies. So we first got introduced to them over here, the gross body with its five elements, and then the subtle body and the causal body. The subtle body with all these different elements also has the mind, intellect, and the ego. That apparatus of the mind, intellect, ego, and the heart is that entire antahakaran. We saw that way back in chapter 2 as well. And it is that antahakaran, this ethereal heart in which Sri Krishna is seated in each of us as living beings. In depth, what that means is we're talking about, heart, mind, intellect, ego. We're talking about how we can evolve spiritually and in terms of consciousness to appreciate or recognize God seated there as the soul of our soul. We described Namaste, which is the God in me bowing to the God in you. That is again Paramatma, one of the three aspects of God that we have studied at length. We have Brahman, the formless. We have Paramatma, the supreme soul. And then we have Bhagavan, of course, the avatars. Paramatma, we bow when we say Namaste. It is Paramatma in me bowing to the Paramatma in you. We get all these opportunities to move away from material afflictions, which also reside, as we say, in the heart, in the mind, in the intellect, in the ego. Pride, jealousy, greed, envy, lust, all these material afflictions, kleshas as we call them in Sanskrit, we try to progress away from them. With that, that is truly what we mean by purity evolving in us, spirituality blossoming in us, and this whole evolution of our consciousness. So that is really how we want to understand this concept here of etheric or ethereal heart in which Sri Krishna is seated. He's there as the Paramatma watching, he's also guiding. Sometimes we may recognize that and appreciate it, sometimes we may not. But all that is Sri Krishna granting us the power of consciousness and that eternality, the sentience to the soul, which again we saw way back in chapter 2 as well. In fact, I'll take us back to chapter 2 one more time. Chapter 2, verse 17, the verse that talks about the soul pervading the entire body and being imperishable. In that, we learned about sentience, and we also first saw the location of the soul, Hridihesha Atma. The Vedas state that the soul resides in the heart. The soul is seated in the region of the heart. And that is again this entire apparatus of the heart, mind, intellect, and ego. So again, God seated inside, if he were to escape from there, if you want to say, or if he were to subtract his power, we would be nothing. Because the soul would lose consciousness, the soul would lose its eternality, its immortality, its sentience. So everything we get is all because of God's power and wealth. And he's doing that, granting it seated within us. So again, Swamiji states that Sri Krishna declares that he is situated in the heart of all living beings. Swamiji quotes from several different scriptures to amplify our understanding here. So, our soul is the body of God, and God is the soul of our soul. That's the Paramatma. So, we've talked about that. And then in the Bhagavatam, we see God is the Atma of the Atma. We also saw the nice example, again, ironic perhaps, but of the gopis who had their own babies and children, yet took time away from them to go and meet and see baby Sri Krishna, which startled or surprised Parikshit, who asked Shukadev during their rendition of the Bhagavatam how that was possible. And Shukadev explained that one has to understand Lord Krishna is the supreme soul of all living beings in the universe. And so he's appeared in a human form. That's by his Yogmaya power. We know that. But we know that there is always this eternal divine connection with God. Remember, we mentioned in class about, Swamiji often stating in his lectures and videos the example of not just the mother and her child, but also us in terms of the earth. Because of gravity, we are always attracted back to earth. And similarly, we as souls, these tiny energy based fragments of God, the super soul, we are always attracted to God. That's why we're always seeking that divine bliss and happiness. Sat Chit Anand, that God is, we're seeking that. Sometimes we recognize it, sometimes we don't. With all that said, God seated in the heart of all living entities, living beings, Sri Krishna further then states that he is the beginning, the middle, and the end of all living beings. Swamiji explains that here and also quotes from the Taittiriya Upanishad, a definition of God. God is he who has these three qualities. He is the one from whom all living beings have emanated. He is the one in or within whom all living beings are situated. And he is the one into whom all living beings shall unite. We originate or emanate from God. He is the creator. We get sustenance and life from him, from his powers, from his energy, and we exist in his realm, in his universe. And when we have liberation, or when there is the complete cycle and the destruction, when we all go back into that latent energy state in Sri Krishna, in Vishnu, then again, that is the end. So God is the beginning, the middle, and the end of all beings. That is also, we said here in chapter 7 early on. If you look at chapter 7, verse 7, the example and the imagery of that thread, Sri Krishna says, everything rests in him as beads strung on a thread. He is the beginning, he is the middle, and he is the end of all living beings. Final connection, remember, Ashaya Stitaha. So we had seen the flyer. We'll see that one more time. Again, representative here. The question was, in which room is Sri Krishna's favorite plush seat? Well, this is probably a couch in a living room. So that is Sri Krishna's living room or favorite room. But where does he live? He lives, as we now have learned, in the heart of all living beings. Representing that, of course, this heart plush cushion here, Sri Krishna gets that favorite plush seat. And that is, in fact, this ethereal heart of all living beings. So with that, we get to the end of today's content. Again, chapter 10, verse 19, detailed discourse. Chapter 10, verse 20, throbbing throne. Please continue to review the material when it's available and prepare for the recap quiz that will cover these two verses when we meet next time, which will be Saturday, 8th February 2025. As always, 8 a.m. Central Time, 7:30 p.m. India time. Till then, thank you so much. Radhe Radhe.